Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 37th episode of Crime Over Wine, the only podcast with head-scratching true crime stories that are just better over a bottle of wine. I'm your host, Liam Collins, and this week my guest host is the host of another true crime podcast, also based right here in the volunteer state of Tennessee. My guest co-host this week is Jordy Smith. Hello, Jordy.
Hello, Liam. So nice to talk to you here.
Yeah, so excited. So Jordy is the host of Beers with Queers, a true crime podcast focused solely on crimes either committed by or against the LGBTQ plus community. And I know I'm a listener, so I know that you do a lot of like historical, historical stuff too involving the LGBTQ plus community. I'm wondering where that whole idea came from, right? Because I know this very well. I need to kind of like carve out your niche in the true crime world. And so I'm wondering where this idea came from.
Yeah, so that's the thing. So like I'm a huge, of course, true crime podcast listener. So I've like listened to everyone that I can think of. And then it was just not only do I like to listen, but I like to read a lot of true crime. Mm-hmm. And I was like read a lot of like cases, and especially as a member of the queer community, I always like to read up on cases involving queer people. And a lot of them a lot of podcasts wouldn't like cover, like I'd read about it and be like, I want to hear someone like talk about this more. And so I'd like look it up.
Sure.
And it'd be like a lot of the cases would be like, no one's done an episode on this yet. And so, I thought about like maybe like writing into my favorite podcast or something like that. But I was like, well, I think it'd be interesting to get like a queer perspective on queer true crime cases. And of course, like the niche thing comes from like, you got to carve out your niche. Like you said, like, normally it's focused around one thing, and that's usually how you get people to, tune in and listen. And so we're like, well, I think there's been a couple of true crime podcasts that have focused specifically on LGBT plus crimes, but I don't think there hasn't been one where it's kind of like our dynamic, because I have a co-host named Brad, and we kind of like bounce off each other. Like he's not as into true crime as I am, and he does not know hardly any of the stories we cover. So it's really cool to be able to like talk to him. Like he's one of the audience members. And so I do get his reaction like live to like certain things and stuff like that. And so it really helps keep the flow of the case going. And so I just, originally it started out as, of course, just a queer true crime podcast, but now it's kind of morphed into this part true crime, part queer history. And so I like that aspect where we kind of go into like the historical, like social and political climate surrounding the queer community at the time of the case. And like, did that affect how the case was handled back then, or how the investigators did it? And so I think that offers a really unique spin on things.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I love the way you guys handle that, for sure. And I also, again, as another member of the LGBTQ plus community, right? Like I, notice so many times that, that first off, like a lot of times, like you were talking about or alluding to there, like the investigation, can often, like be affected by whether or not by the person's sexual orientation, which is horrible, but it's, a reality for, members of our community. And, also too, along those same notes, I noticed so many times when straight people, right, straight podcast hosts are covering these kinds of crimes, like they don't fully get it, right? Because they don't, fully, they're not a member of the community. I mean, you can't get it, right? Yeah. And so like it's just very subtle things that like, may just seem, probably things that we're going to get into in this very case that we're talking about today, that, it just seems so out of this world for people who don't identify as LGBT, but, for people in the LGBT community, it's like, yeah, okay. And, so I feel like it's really important to have that perspective when you're covering these kinds of cases. And it's impossible for one or two people to have, a perspective on every single case that they cover, of course, but it's cool that you guys have that perspective in that.
Right. And I think that's one of the reasons we wanted to keep it niche, because like that's one thing we can offer our point of view on, because a lot of the times there's, like you said, those subtle things, like people may know like, well, why is it like that? Why did this happen? Or why do they act like that? It's like, well, you have to understand from a point of view from like a minority group, like back in that time, that's how things were. Right. That's how you acted, or that's what you had to do in order to not be outed or, queer bashed or something like that. And so I really think it provides a good like understanding, like you understand like where the victims are coming from, or like how people reacted at the time, stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, and I love the way you guys are going with that. With that being said, though, I do think that we should celebrate that idea with some wine. So let's get there because everyone knows that that's my favorite part of the podcast. I love hearing the pop. So let's talk about that. So this week we are drinking Noah River's Pinot Noir. It has a big floral nose of dark cherry, fig, and Asian spice. It also has notes of blackberry, mint, orange pico tea, and pencil shavings. And pencil shavings. It has medium-bodied flavors of dark cherry cola, red raspberry cola, and tea, and finishes with red plums and baker's chocolate. When I wrote that out, I really did not think twice about pencil shavings. I have questions.
I mean, I'm not against it. If it tastes good, I'll do it. I'll drink it.
Hey, you know what? It must, right? Because it was like right up on the top of the shelf, right? So we're going to find out how pencil shavings taste in a wine. So yeah, this is going to be real interesting. But I also do have to know, because one of the things that I reached out, why you guys got my attention was because I know you guys are, beer podcast at the same time, right? And so that's obviously my niche, I'm not a huge beer gal, but I do, drinking, talking about these kinds of things. So, are you guys strictly beer, in recreationally speaking, or are you guys do you guys branch out at all?
So, it's funny because, like the name Beers with Queers, and we do drink beer from time to time, but it's not like something we're like it's not like our biggest like alcoholic passion, I want to say. If I had to choose one, it'd probably be wine.
Okay, cool. You're speaking my language there, Jordy. We can definitely still be friends for sure.
But I was like, wine with queers doesn't sound as good as beers with queers.
Fair.
And so
Very fair.
We do drink beer and stuff like that, but also sometimes we just have like water or something, depending on what it is. But it's
true.
It's more it's more about the idea of like sitting with a friend or someone and having a relaxing beverage, no matter what that is, and then just talking about different true crime cases.
Yeah. Well, and for, maybe for the Beers with Queers listeners who are listening to this episode or this podcast for the first time, the idea of my podcast came from, I was literally sitting on my couch pretty much every week, listening to my favorite true crime podcast, drinking a glass of wine. And I was like, I can't be the only one doing this, right? And so that's where Crime Over Wine was born. So same idea. That's what I can promise you, 50%, I would say, probably the other half are like commuting, right? But 50% of my listeners are doing just that. And so, I love the community building part of this whole thing. And so, so with that being said, cheers to you, Jordy.
Cheers.
So appreciate you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Any excuse to drink wine, so...
I am right there with you for sure. And I was going to say, so when you were talking about, sometimes we just like drink water, on the podcast, that's not me. I am exclusively drinking wine on this podcast, just in case anyone is sitting at home wondering, oh, no, like there's no way he's actually getting drunk. No, I'm actually getting drunk talking about this. The only way I'm going to be able to talk through these cases, specifically the one we're talking about this week, Jordy. So you want to get there because I know we have a lot to talk about.
I do want to get there because I've heard the case and stuff like that, and I think I've heard a few stories about it, but like it's been a while, but I just know it's a pretty knucking futz case. So
yeah. Oh yeah. Big time. I like that. Knucking futz. I'm going to use that more often. Well, this week I want to tell you, about the craziest true crime story I've heard by far, by a long shot. I mean, head scratching doesn't even begin to describe this. This is probably the most mind-blowing case, and I promise you, you are going to want to hear every single detail and are going to be holding on to every single second of this case. So hold on tight. This week, I want to tell you all about Robert Wone and the mystery on Swann Street. On the morning of August 2nd, 2006, Robert Wone left his home in Fairfax County, Virginia with his wife, Catherine, to go to work. They both commuted to D.C. by train every single day. Robert worked as general counsel for Radio Free Asia, a government-funded nonprofit news organization, but for audience specifically in Asia and the Asian community. Robert had worked his whole life to become a lawyer. He was 32 in 2006, but more than a decade earlier, his career started at the College of William and Mary, where he studied pre-law and made some friends too. Namely, he became really close with a classmate named Joseph Price. Joseph was also on track to become a lawyer of some kind. The two became pals, drinking buddies, etc. As Robert and Kathy arrived in D.C. the morning of August 2nd, 2006, the couple kissed and departed, knowing that Robert was going to have to work late that night. And as that late night came, Robert decided that he was not going to take the train back to his home across the Potomac, but instead he was going to spend the night at Joseph's place, which Robert had never done before, but he was close enough with Joseph to make this kind of ask. It's not totally clear what time Robert arrived to Joseph's townhome in DuPont Circle, but we do know that Robert called Joseph around 10:30 that night, presumably to confirm that he could still spend the night, and then Robert got into a taxi and went to Joseph's. Now, Joseph's home was only a mile from Robert's office, and based on mapping, GPS, etc., it's presumed that he arrived at Joseph's house about 10 minutes later.
I think that's the thing that gets me about this case that like is so crazy to me, is the fact that there was no way it could have been that premeditated or anything like that, because it's like this was like a last minute decision by him to spend the night with a friend and stuff like that. So it's not like someone could have been planning this for weeks or days even, or even hours, honestly. And so like the fact that there was such a little time frame between the time that he got there, like, and had all this planned, is part of the like bewildering aspects to me.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and we're going to get to exactly what Jordy's alluding to, right? But like kind of what you're talking about here is like it's so random, right? But like so specific because he's never done this before, so it's not like he did this every Tuesday.
Right.
So it's like so it's crazy. So for sure, we're definitely going to talk all about that, a whole lot more about that for sure, Jordy. So Joseph was not alone. No, Robert knew very well that Joseph was not only an openly gay man, but that he was also in a polyamorous relationship. He lived with two other men, Victor Zaborski, who Joseph had been with for about 6 years, and Dylan Ward, who Joseph had been with for about 3 years. The four guys hung for a little bit, drank some wine before Robert decides that he was going to take a shower and head to sleep in their guest bedroom. And just a little while later, Joseph, Victor, and Dylan all decide to hit the hay too. Now, we're about to skip around a bit here, so everyone hold on tight. But the reason we're going to do that is because it's really not clear what happens in the next hour. But what we do know is that at 11:49 at night, Victor calls 911.
DC Emergency 911, operator 6752. Do you need police, fire, or ambulance?
Immediately. We need an ambulance.
What's wrong, ma'am?
We had someone that was in our house, evidently, and they stabbed somebody.
Okay, somebody's inside the house now?
I don't know. We heard.
Are they bleeding? You see someone bleeding?
Someone is bleeding in our house.
Okay, where's they bleeding from?
I think in the stomach.
In the stomach? Is he cautious? Calm down for me. I'm going to send some help, okay? Female or male?
It's a male. He's a friend of ours. He was spending the night with us.
Okay, and who was the person that stabbed him? Do you know? Is he conscious?
We need an ambulance.
Ma'am, listen to me.
He's not conscious.
He's not conscious at all?
No. We need someone right now.
Is he breathing? Listen to me. Calm down. I'm going to help you, okay? Is he breathing?
I'm upstairs, and he's downstairs. I don't know.
Okay, who's downstairs with him?
My partner is downstairs with him right now. He told me to go upstairs and call the police immediately. I just went to the stairs.
Okay, who's the person? Okay, I'm sending paramedics and the police. Okay, who's the person that stabbed him?
I don't know. We think it's somebody with an intruder in the house. We heard the chime at the door.
And it's 15, ma'am, calm down. 1509 Swann Street, Northwest. Am I correct?
Yes, it is.
The person that stabbed him, is he still in the home?
I don't know.
We got help en route, okay?
Pardon me?
We have help en route.
Thank you. They're here.
They are en route to you now. I'm sending the police and the paramedics, okay, to assist. Okay, what I need you to do is go downstairs, okay? The place wherever he was stabbed at, I need you to get a dry cloth, okay? And just apply pressure to that area. If he was wherever he was stabbed at on his body, I need you to take a towel downstairs while you're waiting for the paramedics to arrive and just apply pressure. Even if the rag or towel is saturated with blood, just get another towel and put it on top, but never lift the first towel off the area. hold it on. Once it gets filled up with blood, just put another towel on top of that and just apply pressure until the paramedics arrive. Yes.
On the leg.
Yeah.
With stab in the heart.
In the heart?
Yes. In the center of his chest.
Okay. Is he breathing?
Is he breathing?
We have help en route now, okay? You don't know who it was?
No idea. So don't press this.
Okay, is he breathing?
He's breathing, but he needs help now.
Okay, we have help en route, ma'am, okay? We do have help en route. Okay, just go down there and try to tell your husband or your the other half to just try to keep him calm and talk to him, okay? Keep him calm and talk to him until someone gets there.
Okay.
And at the same time, get a dry cloth and just hold it right there in the area.
My partner's holding the holding it on him.
Okay, and once it gets saturated with blood, tell him get another one. Go get another towel so you can apply it on top of that one once it gets filled up with blood. We need you to apply pressure on that area.
He is applying pressure right now.
Okay, just hold it there until the paramedics get there. They should be pulling up any moment if they're already en route to your location. You don't know who did this.
We have no idea who did this.
Is the door open so they can get in?
We don't know how they got in.
Okay, well, I'm asking you now, is the door open so the paramedics can get in once they get here?
What? Sorry. What were you saying?
Is the door open so they can get in? Is the door open so the paramedics can get in the home?
I'm going to go down.
Is this a private home or apartment?
It's a home.
It's a home. It's 1509 Swann Street, Northwest.
The person had one of our knives.
The person that stabbed him ran out the door with a knife?
I think so.
Okay, anybody get any type of description of the person that came in the home?
We have no idea. We have no description. We heard the chime, and we heard the scream from our friend.
Okay.
And so we came running downstairs. We ran in.
So you both was upstairs and your friend was downstairs?
Yes.
You heard the door open and then you heard the scream?
I didn't hear the door open until after the scream, and then we ran down the stairs and we heard we have an alarm, and so the chime went off.
Okay.
Is the ambulance, please? We really need the ambulance.
Okay, they en route now, ma'am. Go to the door. They should be pulling up any moment, okay?
I'm afraid to go downstairs.
Okay, the person who's downstairs was the person that was assaulted.
No, we're on the second floor.
Okay, so somebody need to go downstairs and open the door for the paramedics. You're not sure if that person's still in the home or not.
I have no idea.
Okay, we have paramedics en route, okay?
What time is it?
What time is it at the moment?
Yes.
23:54. It's 11:54, ma'am.
11:54.
Yes.
I mean,
I'll stay on the line with you. I will stay on the line until somebody gets here, okay? I won't hang up.
we need them right now. I'm not hanging up, but we need help now.
Okay, they en route, ma'am. They are en route. Let me know when you hear the paramedics. Can you look out the window and see if you hear them coming?
I'm looking out the window, and I see nothing. I see nobody.
Okay, it seems like forever, but they are en route, ma'am. They're coming.
Here they are. Here they are.
They're there?
I'm going downstairs.
Okay. I'll stay on the line with you till you open the door for the paramedics, okay?
Help us. We have someone was stabbed. They're on our second floor.
Ma'am?
No, it's really an emergency. I mean, maybe. Please hurry.
Ma'am, it's going to be okay.
Okay, so Jordy, I have like so many thoughts racing through my head right now. I want to hear what you have to say though first.
It's always weird hearing like the 911 calls in case, especially after like so soon after it happened. But like right off the bat, one, it was really weird that she kept referring to him as ma'am.
Yeah.
Was the very first thing.
Been there, though. Been there.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've all been there,
Yeah.
queer people. But, and just the weird things, like he's so sure somebody was in the house and stuff like that. It's always weird little things that like they seem to go out of their way to mention.
Yeah.
And of course we all react differently to trauma, especially that kind of trauma, but it's interesting.
Well, and to harp on that a little bit more too, right? Because when you talk about like going out of their way to mention this kind of stuff, right? Like to the point of like the operator says, okay, well, like, is the door open or something like that? And he responds saying, oh, like, I don't know how he got into the house. And when like she was talking about like, is the door open so that way paramedics can come in, which like, again, like crazy situation, lot going on. So like, okay, misunderstanding. Like I get that too. But to that point, like he kept bringing it back up, right? Like he kept, making sure to say, like, intruder, burglar, like whoever, like broke into the house.
Yep.
So
exactly. And that's something I think, like, again, as someone that listened to, like, used to watch all those true crime shows, even like growing up and stuff like that. Like I learned from all the investigators' sayings, like when they keep mentioning and harping on very specific details, it starts to sound a little staged or set up, kind of, because it's like they've ran through the script in their head, like it was an intruder, they did this, we don't have to worry about how they got in. Like that makes it too complicated. Just stick with it was an intruder. It's the investigator's job to figure out the rest.
And that reminds me of the Michael Peterson, Kathleen Peterson case, right? Of like, because we covered that back on episode 19 of this podcast, where Kathleen, again, fell down the stairs, like allegedly fell down the stairs, and Michael, kept like bringing that back up into the conversation, right? Of like, like she felt like that was the narrative that he clearly wanted to get across here. And like he wanted, and like the calls kind of give me similar vibes. Again, like I know like this all in hindsight, right? But like it gives me similar vibes in terms of like the very hysterical, like crying, kind of like situation going on here. Like, and it sounds very believable to me, right? Like I'm listening to this and I'm like, okay, like the cries, the sobs sound legit, right? Like I have like just listening to that alone, I have no reason to think like anything nefarious is going on.
Right. Like at first glance, like hearing it, like that does sound like someone that's just like stumbled upon this horrific crime and like they're like, of course, freaking out and sobbing and stuff like that. I think any person would be. And so at first glance, it seems like maybe like this was a horrible like incident involving an intruder, because sounds believable at first
for sure. And let's like recap, again, so like what like the timeline here, right? So Robert arrives at the house around 10:30. It's now 11:50-ish, right? That like all this is happening. And so an hour later, and less than an hour and a half later, about like somewhere around there, is when this 911 call is placed, is when Robert is stabbed to death, right? And so let's kind of recap that call a little bit in terms of just like the mechanics of this thing. So the operator instructs Victor to get a towel and put the towel on Robert to try to like cover the wound, right? Like that.
Yeah, stop the bleeding,
right? So very like, again, normal instructions here. Important. We're going to talk about why that's important a little bit later on, but so just keep all that in mind. I just want to flag that for everybody. And then also too, so the scream that they're talking about here, right, that the Victor's talking about, and he kind of says two different stories, and it might have been very subtle, but it's two different like occurrences here. The first time he says that he heard the chime, and then then a little bit later on, then he heard a scream, and then like a minute later or so, she asks again, okay, well, what happened? And then he says, oh, I heard the scream and then I heard the chime, right? So it was almost, again, maybe that was just a slip of the tongue, but feels a little Freudian to me. Like, I don't know. It feels like you're just like, oh no, I didn't say that right the first time. I need to make sure I say it right the second time. That's how I take that.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that's like, so like can be especially frustrating for investigators, because you can look at it from both perspectives. Right. Someone did, if like, they really did just stumble upon this horrific crime, of course they're going to be scatterbrained and stuff like that. And so like mixing up something like that is easily explained. Like, well, I mean, like they're like, mind's going a million miles per hour. Right. But then also you can look at it from the perspective like, well, they were telling their story and then they
Right.
made a little slip up, and so then they try to retcon it immediately after.
Sure.
So they can be like, actually, that's not what I said.
Yeah.
I said
Or
this.
not what I
And so-
meant to say.
Yeah, not what I
right.
meant to say.
Yeah.
And so it's one of
exactly.
those, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Could be either or.
It could be either or. Well, let's pick right back up into where we're at in this whole debacle situation madness, because just 5 minutes after the call was placed into 911, and you can almost kind of hear this happening during the call, paramedics arrive on scene and they say the home is just off to them. When they arrive, a man, Victor, greets them at the front door, freshly showered and in a clean white robe. Like, literally, his hair is still wet. And he's oddly calm, according to them. The paramedics enter the home and are guided upstairs, where they're greeted with another man, again, freshly showered and in a clean white robe. That man is Dylan, and he's staring straight ahead. And when his gaze is eventually broken by the paramedics, he turns to them and backs into the bedroom at the top of the stairs without saying a single word.
Okay, yeah, that's already right off the bat. That would, the vibes are way off. Bad vibes everywhere. Because especially if you look freshly showered right after a murder, I don't think that's, it's one thing to be scatterbrained and like crying, but like if your first thought after discovering your friend's been murdered is to
let's take a shower.
Let's take a fresh shower real quick. We got to look good when the paramedics show up.
Right.
Or something like that.
Right.
And so it's
right. Well, and too, like these like paramedics, especially in DC, I would imagine, right, have seen it all, right, and so they know, like, when their instincts are off, like when their gut feeling is just a little bit off. Like, I trust them more than anybody else. Like, they know what these type of situations should feel like for them, and this just ain't it.
Yeah, I mean, especially like you said, DC, it's like been there, done that.
Right.
And so if they're saying everything's off, believe them 100%.
100%. Well, at this point, paramedics say the hair on the back of their necks is all the way up. They turn 180 degrees to the guest bedroom, where they can see Robert Wone on a sofa bed. As they walk toward the bedroom, they see Joseph on the floor of the bedroom, again, freshly showered and in a clean white robe. And Robert is clearly deceased with 3 stab wounds to his chest. And as odd as this whole environment is seeming to them, there's something else that is just even more odd, like far more odd than anything they've seen so far or anything they'll see moving forward. There's Robert dead with gaping stab wounds in his chest. But where is all of the blood? Get ready for that big test with Study.com. Study.com offers learning materials and test prep, even LSAT study prep guides for all of my legal nerds listening. Unfortunately, there aren't any wine study guides, and believe me, I did check. Listeners can get 30% off their first 3 months of any subscription level using the promo code CrimeOverWine. Again, that's promo code CrimeOverWine, no spaces, for 30% off your first 3 months at Study.com. Learn faster, stay motivated, study smarter with our sponsor, Study.com. Paramedics examine Robert and don't find blood anywhere, or at least not nearly as much as they would have expected to find a stabbing victim. There really wasn't much on Robert's William and Mary shirt that he was wearing, and there was just a small amount of blood on the bed sheets that Robert was sleeping on. As for that towel that dispatchers told Victor to use on Robert's wounds, they did find some blood on that, but again, not nearly as much as they would have had expected.
Again, like you said, right off the bat, vibes are off. If I'm stabbing victim, I'm thinking, especially 3 stab wounds, I'm thinking blood everywhere, because it's a violent crime, and it's a personal crime especially. So I'm thinking like blood on the walls and the bed sheets and stuff like that. And then especially when there's a stabbing victim, my first thought is like, where's the possible murder weapon? Like, did they find it?
Right.
Like, that's the biggest thing, because sometimes, a lot of the times, it could be like they use the knife that's at the location or something like that, especially if it's a house.
Right. Yeah, you would think so. And to be clear, again, going back to this towel that we're talking about, like if the operator is telling him to like press it on the wounds to stop the bleeding, like, and you should like go look up pictures of this towel, everybody, like who's listening to this at home, because there are like splotches. Like, it's not like I expect like a blood, like 3 stab wounds, like a blood soaked towel, and like it's not nearly that.
And especially if, like, you know, this is your dear friend, like when they tell you to press a towel on their wounds, you're going to be like, you know, pressing on a wound. So I would imagine even more blood because you're pressing so much on their chest. Because, like, I used to actually work in an operating room. And so, you know, I've seen stab victims before, and it can get really bloody, especially when you're trying to stop the bleeding. Right. And so, like, the more you push on it, the more blood that's just going to come out. And so the fact that there's, like, 3 little blotches really suggests that more. It kind of sounds like they didn't push it on it until after he was already well dead, at least to me, because by the time the blood can, like, settle and stuff, so you're not going to get as much out when you push on it. And so that was my first thought from seeing that.
Yeah, I mean, again, or didn't do it at all, and just like, you know, and just like blotted it on there to like which doesn't really
we did it,
seem, right. Well, but like doesn't really seem all that smart at all because like, well, anyways. But as for your question though, Jordy, about the murder weapon though, they did find a knife on the nightstand, and Joseph tells first responders that he found the knife laying on top of Robert's chest, and when he found him, he took the knife and put it on the nightstand out of like instinct, I guess.
I would call, if I were the paramedics, I would call horseshit on that immediately.
That's not my first instinct. Yeah.
And so now your prints are conveniently on the knife that was just on your murdered friend's body. And so you just nonchalantly picked it up. And was the knife bloody? Yeah. I'm like, if it wasn't, then I'm like,
So not really, actually, again, to answer that question, but also like, let's keep in mind, like, Joseph's a lawyer.
Especially if he is like a lawyer and he knows all this thing. I think he may know to like accidentally contaminate the crime scene as much as possible. And so it's like, it sounds stupid because like touching the knife that just killed your friend. But again, it goes back to like the 911 call. He can be like, well, I didn't know at the time. And like, this is what I originally told people. Like, I did pick it up out of instinct. And so they can like, kind of circle back to that, like if they're like, well, your prints are on the knife.
Sure. Well, when police arrive, they pull Joseph, Victor, and Dylan aside and start asking them about what happened. And immediately there's like a very odd power dynamic going on here. Joseph is telling the entire story, and every time Dylan starts to say something, Joseph just stares him down, and Dylan immediately just stops talking, and Joseph picks it right back up again.
Again, going back to that, like the 911 call, it kind of seems staged and rehearsed, and it seems phony, like phoned in almost. And so it's more of an acting challenge than a...
Yeah. Well, but again, you know, going back to like Joseph's a lawyer. And so like he, like, you know, in any situation, right, like even if they're totally innocent, like I could see, like, again, playing devil's advocate here of like they, like, you know, find themselves in the situation, like it could very well be that they end up being suspects. I'm sure they, you know, even if they did absolutely nothing wrong, I'm sure they would have been suspects at some point. And so, but like from like Joseph, like coming across like immediately, you know, just trying to pull the whole narrative together. Right. And, you know, because he probably knows more than the other two because of his experience. And so it makes sense on that front. But at the same time, like in this type of environment, like you would think that like it would just involve everybody just kind of like piecing together their story as much as you possibly can. And so it just feels off, I suppose.
Right, I get what you're saying. Like, it's kind of like, you know, don't talk to the police unless your lawyer's present type of situation.
Right. Sure.
And stuff.
He's a lawyer.
Yeah. And so I completely understand that point of view, like not wanting to get in trouble or anything like that if you do become a suspect. But then again, like you said, at the same time, like you're supposed to be like, dear friend was just brutally murdered in your home. So I would want everyone to like
everything.
To know everything, like between all of us. And so again, it's that thing where it can go either way depending on how you look at it. But I do want to know, like, you know, like what exactly did they say happened? Because that's the biggest thing.
Oh, that is the biggest thing. And they are sticking to the story that someone had broken into the townhome and killed Robert in the middle of the night, and that they were all awoken by what they called a low scream in the middle of the night. But something about this just did not seem right at all. Again, not only was this whole entire scene just not adding up to investigators, but a break-in just did not seem like the right answer here right away. Not only were these three men setting off like every alarm bell in the book, but Robert seemed to be freshly cleaned too. Again, no blood anywhere, so in order for us to believe that an intruder was responsible for Robert's death, we are also to believe that this intruder went up these stairs past Dylan's room, which was, again, right at the top of the stairs, straight to Robert's room, killed him, showered off his body, changed the sheets, and left without anyone else in the house hearing a thing more than a low scream.
And not only that, like all that, like again, like you said, it sounds far-fetched to believe the intruder like specifically target him and then had the time to clean the body. Mm-hmm. But also the fact that all this happened in like the span of what, an hour?
An hour, yeah, right.
And so that's what I keep coming back to, especially like from the time he set out to like called up Joseph to be like, hey, can I spend the night here at your place or whatever, all the way up until his murdered body is found freshly cleaned. And that literally is in the span of a couple of hours, like from the time he called Joseph to the time all this happened. And so it's just wild how all these strange series of events are supposed to have happened to him at once.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm like calling bullshit on some things.
Well, a little bit. And like, again, like all of that happening, like the one night that this guy is here, right? Like, and like, again, like walked right past like all of the opportunities, like, cause kind of going back to what you're talking about before, right? Like if like, let's say this is like a very, well thought out situation, right? Of like an intruder, trying to get into these like, seemingly wealthy, guy's house, or maybe like whatever it is. Like it would make more sense. You would think that they would know, right? That like it was to go to the people who actually lived there and wouldn't even think twice to go into the guest bedroom, right? If this is as well thought out, as it seems to be, right? If it is indeed an intruder. So like coincidental as heck that it's just, the one night that this dude is at their home. Everyone else is totally unharmed, practically doesn't know a thing, and this guy is just like gone into the night again, all within an hour and a half. Ooh, I don't know.
Yeah, like make it make sense, honestly, and especially the fact that like there's three other men in the house and none of them hear a thing, like literally anything.
Sure.
And also the fact like what intruder is going to break into a house with four grown men and like murder one and then leave without taking anything,
right?
And like you said, it couldn't honestly be anyone that was personally like targeting Robert, because this was a last minute thing. So how would they have known his schedule or anything like that? Because this was like a last minute like detour from what he normally does. And so it's just, there's too many coincidences for this to be even a little bit plausible, for me at least right now.
Yeah, well, and like coincidences, but like necessary coincidences, like
how convenient.
Right, very, very convenient. Like all of these coincidences had to have like lined up perfectly in order for this like story to make any sort of sense. But the three men though are sticking to this story, and they said that although the front door was locked, they aren't sure the back door was. So they think it's most likely that the intruder scaled a back fence and entered in that way. But again, this isn't really feeling right to investigators. They look through the backyard, and there is, in fact, a layer of dust that is completely undisturbed along the fence, and cobwebs all around the fence, too, that are, like, totally intact. That just does not point to anyone climbing over this fence at all. So their alarm bells are all the way off. But investigators just have some more questions for Joseph, Victor, and Dylan, and so they take them down to the precinct to ask them some more questions, and they all tell pretty much the same story. Now, this is some important context, but Joseph and Victor have their own separate bedroom from Dylan, and their bedroom is actually on the third floor of this townhome, so a floor above Dylan and this guest bedroom. So they all tell police that they were fast asleep in their respective bedrooms when they heard a noise that woke them up, and went downstairs to find Robert dead in their guest bedroom, and they called 911 at this point. And as investigators begin to question the three men, they are becoming more and more obvious that they are simply not buying their story and are considering all three of them suspects. In their interrogation, bits of which are shown in Peacock's docuseries Who Killed Robert Wone, investigators begin this really targeted line of questioning that, in my opinion, either comes from some level of ignorance or possibly a place of really trying to get under these guys' skins. They start asking about their sexuality and their relationship with Robert, and they ask him if they were ever attracted to Robert and ask what a straight married guy would be doing staying over at 3 gay guys' house. They even accuse them of trying to, quote, gay him up. There is even this really potent line directly from the interrogation video, and Jordy, I'm hoping that you're going to be able to read that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got 3 homosexuals in a house, and I've got 1 straight guy. What's he doing over there? I think we were all drinking wine. You know what's going to happen tonight. You're coming to Jesus tonight. That's what's going on. And that's a thing, too, like when the little bit I have heard of this case and stuff like that is one thing I always like stuck on was the fact these investigators did harp on the fact like they were gay, polyamorous, sure. And that a straight guy was at a bunch of gay guys' house. And it's something I've seen a lot online too, where they're like, you know, what was he doing there? Like he must have been there to like for some sexual relationship or something like that. And it always frustrates me because I'm like, you know, it is very much possible, and it's actually really common for straight men to be friends with gay guys. Not everything has to be sexualized and stuff like that. Sure. And so, I mean, like to jump to that conclusion, and like you said, it was just to try to get under the 3 men's skin, but at the same time, it's also kind of like, you know, you're assuming things about a dead man that he's not here to defend himself against. And so it's one of those things I think was in really bad taste to like kind of put out there into the American or like the consciousness of everyone to be like, well, what if he was gay and stuff like that? And it's like, well, also like he doesn't have to be gay to spend a day at like not at his best friend's house who just so happens to be gay and in a triad relationship. Because, you know, like I have plenty of straight male friends and stuff like that, and there's nothing nefarious going on about it. And so that's a part that
you're
always
not trying to kill them, to be clear, just to be
clear. I'm not trying to kill them or anything else. I just want their company.
Okay, cool. We'll just making sure. But to that point though, like the fact that they are gay and in this like polyamorous relationship has nothing to do with whether or not they have murdered this guy at this point, right? Like if this is really in their head, I don't know. And like I do have to imagine that, you know, they probably have like a good idea of kind of what goes on at this point. And so like my like preserving my like faith in humanity, like I have to imagine that this is the investigator just trying to like get at them and trying to like get them to crack and like trying to get him angry. Like Joseph seems like that kind of dude to just like, you know, eventually just like, you know, like implode, right, of like in anger if like you get him mad enough. So like maybe that's what he was trying to do. I have to imagine that's what he was trying to do, you know, so that way I'm not super insulted. I have to imagine that's what he's trying to do. But that's kind of where I'm at with that. That's the only place I can land. You know, all 3 of them, though, maintain that Robert was totally straight and that they were all just friends with him. And Joseph even says that Robert wasn't even his type, even if he was gay. And it was during this hours-long interrogation that police start to get a really interesting perspective into this whole polyamorous relationship. You see, what police thought was a love triangle of sorts was more like 2 individual relationship. Joseph was in a relationship with Victor and Dylan, but that didn't necessarily mean that Dylan and Victor were in a relationship together.
Okay, like, I can see where, like, they originally thought, well, all 3 of them were together and stuff like that, but I think maybe that just comes from maybe them not understanding, you know, polyamorous relationships can mean all sorts of things. Like, they all don't have 3 have to be in a relationship together. Like, it could be 2 or 3 different relationships or stuff like that. And so I guess like right now, I think they may be looking at it suspiciously, but I guess like to me, like understanding a little bit of the poly community, I'm like, well, I mean, that doesn't honestly seem too weird to me.
Right. Yeah. Kind of what we were talking about before about, you know, you really have to be in this community to like really understand like fully. I will say it is kind of important. It becomes very important later on, this like, you know, this detail. So keep that in mind for sure. But, you know, well, when all 3 men gave more or less the same story that night, they left refusing to comment any further on the case than they already had. Dylan, however, is taken down to an FBI office to be given a polygraph test. In this test, he is asked 2 questions. Did you kill Robert Wone? And do you know who killed Robert Wone? And police say that his results come back with deception indicated. And in the world of police and polygraph tests, that is considered a big, fat failure.
I know, like, they love to use polygraph tests and stuff like that, but going back to, like, listening to true crime podcasts and stuff like that, number one rule I've always learned is you never, ever agree to a polygraph test, because if it comes back that you're telling the truth, they're going to say, oh, well, that's
Faulty
junk
test.
science.
Yeah.
But then if it comes back that you failed, they're going to say, see, he failed. He's guilty.
Right.
And so it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. So you might as well just not do it at all.
And if you refuse, then you look extra guilty too, right?
Extra guilty too.
Yeah. Like, listen, that is like, if you, like, I've talked about this before on this podcast, do not take the polygraph test, even if they're threatening to shoot you out back to if you don't.
It's better not to take it at all than to take it and fail it, and now you look twice as guilty.
Big time. Yeah, I will say too, because again, this is like laid out pretty well in like the Peacock docuseries, which I highly recommend, by the way. But the I guess the reason that they like singled out Dylan in all this is because like based on this dynamic, they figured out that he was like the weak link. Like Joseph was clearly in charge. Victor, looked however Victor looked, but like Dylan looked like he was about to crack. And so they were like, let's single him out. Let's separate him from the rest of the pack, and we're gonna try to get him on this, like pressure him on this polygraph test. And so that's really good context, I think. Also, according to that docuseries on Peacock, Joseph returns just a few minutes later after leaving the interrogation room, and when he comes back, he says something really interesting. He realizes that what he had told police originally about what happened wasn't entirely true. If you remember, Joseph originally told police that he had found the knife resting on top of Robert's chest, but when he comes back, he says that he had actually pulled the knife directly out of his chest and then rested it on the nightstand.
Okay, first of all, it's one thing to pull it off the dead man's body, but to pull it out of him
is
the another thing. Yeah, and especially if you're a lawyer, I think you know, like, that's the worst thing you could possibly do.
Yeah. Well, and so I guess, and here's like putting myself in his mind, right? Of like, and like, again, go look up pictures of this knife. Like, we're going to link to all of this evidence, like on our website and in our show notes. So you'll be able to see it. But like the knife is like, it does not look like it was just used to stab someone at all. It looks like there's like spots of blood on it. Like, okay. So like maybe that's where he's coming from, of like, oh, well, actually, like, I feel the need to say that the knife, like, I actually pulled the knife out of his chest because there's blood on it. But to me, that's like even more ridiculous to even imagine, because like there's not enough blood for it to have been pulled directly out of his chest. Like, that doesn't make any fucking sense. Like, I don't get that. But like, and again, like sure, like this is a very emotional night for all of them, right? Like to give them credit, I suppose. So like, I guess I could see a world where it's just like wait, no, I thought this is what happened, but actually, like, now that I think about it more, like now that the haze has been lifted, I actually, like, this is what happened, but I'm still just not buying it at all.
No, especially if, like, I guess I know it's really frustrating for investigators, because like you do have all that, like the story doesn't make sense. Now he's saying he pulled the knife directly out, but the knife doesn't look like it was used really to stab someone and stuff like that. But then again, it's like, how can you really prove that didn't happen? Like, you can't prove it didn't, but you can't prove that it did. And so it's just like that one of those details where you're like stuck in the middle and like you can't move one way or the other.
Yeah. Well, and how do you do that, right? Like, I mean, unless, besides just like pure logic, right, that like any of us could use, like how do you scientifically prove to a judge and jury that this is how this actually happened? Well, police realize that they aren't going to get much out of Joseph, Victor, and Dylan. That makes a lot of sense. And so the only thing that would give them the answers they need is in the home on Swann Street. Police start scraping through every inch of Swann Street, and again, are just not seeing the obvious signs of a break-in as much as the three men who live there are leading them to believe. And they're not even just searching the home. Police even execute a search warrant at Joseph's legal office, but I never read anything that suggested that they found anything substantial from that search either. They ended up spending 3 weeks examining the home on Swann Street in detail, removing flooring, pieces of walls, a chunk of the staircase, the washing machine, and sink traps. They even brought in cadaver dogs to smell throughout the home, and the cadaver dogs end up hitting on 2 spots in the home and signaling for blood that was on the lint trap in the dryer and on a drain on the patio.
Okay, so I know what I think that means to me, which is if they look freshly showered on the night of the murder, and so does Robert, and now the cadaver dogs are hitting on blood in the lint trap and a drain outside.
Right.
Obviously, like, all 3 of these dudes took the time to wash themselves and Robert of any evidence, but also, you know, like, what do the police think may have proven, if anything?
Well, these were odd spots for the dogs to pick up blood scents, of course, and so their theory was that whoever killed Robert likely washed their clothes and the sheets in the laundry, which would logically lead to a blood scent in the lint trap, right? And they also believe the perpetrator possibly could have hosed themselves or possibly someone else down outside, washing the blood away down the drain.
So now the story's evolved to, like, the murder broke into the house somehow, snuck upstairs past one other person's room, murdered Robert, and then took the time to, like, strip down and, like, use their dryer and washing machine. And it's like, you know, just going through the spin cycle, like, and they're upstairs and like, I didn't hear anything. It's like, that's my story and I'm sticking to it within an hour and a half. This is a very efficient, like, murderer, like that stranger that just broke in, and like he's got it down to every second, like very, very efficient with his time whenever he does this.
Sure.
Or
he does this often.
Yeah, or, you know, these 3 are full of shit.
Well, let's find out what it is. Let's do that. Well, and then there is this, like, really odd detail, of course, about the blood on Robert's body being, like, practically non-existent, despite his intense stab wounds, right? So police believe that the perpetrator or perpetrators also used this time to clean off Robert's body, too. But in order for them to be able to prove that, they need to prove that there is also a blood presence inside of the home, right? So they use a blood-detecting reagent all across the house, on the stairs, in the living room, in the guest bedroom, of course, and in the bathroom. And the place lights up like a Christmas tree. There are blue reactions everywhere in practically every single room. So they document the reactions and take them to their experts. And you want to know what they tell them?
I kind of do, because if it lights up like a Christmas tree, I'm hoping it says, listen, these are your guys. But you never know.
You truly never know. And, you know, but unfortunately, you're wrong, Jordy.
Oh.
The blood experts tell police that they did it wrong. So, according to the Peacock docuseries on this case, police applied the reagent to the surfaces in a way that would totally ruin the results and ruin any chances of anyone being able to try again. Basically, and like I learned a lot about how this reagent worked throughout this research, it can only be applied to the horizontal surfaces. If you applied the reagent to vertical surfaces like walls, it would drip and it wouldn't produce very good results, and you also couldn't try again. The officers sprayed the reagent all over the shower, which they strongly suspected was where Robert was hosed down. But once that reagent is applied, there's no going back. There's no way to tell with any kind of scientific or legal certainty that there was a presence of blood almost anywhere inside of that townhouse.
And I think that's one of those details that's so extremely frustrating, because it's like, obviously, like, either the universe like loves these people, like the perpetrators, or they're just the luckiest bastards in history,
or both
honestly. And so it's just like the fact that like a mistake like that ruins any chance now. And so it's like blood evidence has just been like completely eliminated from this case, which is like what would be the smoking gun normally. Huge. And it's just that one little mistake that keeps this case from, you know, harder to solve. And so it's just, it'll piss you off the longer you think about it.
Yeah. Well, and like unfortunately it's just one of those situations where it's like these are human beings doing
Right.
this kind of things, and mistakes happen, you know, and unfortunately mistakes happen in like very critical pieces of evidence. And like what do you do to prevent that? Like I don't know. Like it feels like it could have happened in any situation, right? Like, and unfortunately we just didn't have a whole lot else to go off of at this point.
Right, yeah. So it's just, you know, like the science and stuff is never wrong, but humans can be, and humans can make mistakes and stuff like that. And so it's just one of those terrible, shitty circumstances.
Well, this was definitely not everything that police found when searching the apartment. No, police found something that, you know, maybe would be a bit odd in other circumstances, but in this case, the things that they found in Dylan's room were beyond alarming.
Welcome to the Crime Vineyard. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Candy.
And this is Sips of Crime. Grab a glass.
Grab a friend.
And let's dive in to some of the most notorious tales of murder, mystery, betrayal,
And a few laughs along the way.
You can find us at sipsofcrime.com and wherever you get your podcasts.
Every other Monday.
Back to you, Liam. Stay alive.
So, Jordy, need to know, how is your wine tasting? This case is making me drink a whole lot. So,
I mean, it's tasting wonderful. It's easier to sip the longer I do it, and now I'm like more relaxed and chill because, you know, like when I podcast, I'm kind of like always stiff at first, and so like having wine to sip on really eases you into the process of hearing yourself talk for an hour or so.
True.
Especially when it's a frustrating case like this, because like every time it's like there's a new detail, it's like, are you shitting me? Hold on. And then it's like you take another sip.
It's easier to swallow. Yeah. I totally agree with that, and so that's why I think that you need to start getting drunk on your podcast is basically what I'm trying to say. So let me know how I can support that.
Okay, I mean, yeah, I'm down for it. I mean, you know, it's hard to get drunk off beer, when you're doing it for just an hour, but I mean, I could pull it off with wine.
Yeah, we can do that. We can transfer it. I think wine with queers, I think, does have like a very distinct sound to it. So just let me know how I can support that. Maybe there's a spin-off in the works here. Maybe there's a spin-off.
I mean, I'm always down to expand and branch out. The bigger the better.
Let's do some business, baby.
I'll let you have the trademark.
All right, well, let's get right back into this case, because speaking of wine, we're going to need a whole lot more to get through this next half, so let's do that. So police make a list of more than a dozen sex toys that they had documented from Dylan's room. And we're not just talking about, you know, again, we're going to get into a whole lot of like very graphic things here, so like buckle up, everybody. You know, we're not just talking about like a dildo, a vibrator, maybe some handcuffs. We are talking about some real specific fetish-inducing toys here. And, you know, I'm not going to describe what most of this is, so go look it up for yourself if you don't understand, or, you know, if you care to do that. You know, inside of Dylan's room, police find, among other things, shackles, whips, chains, leather neck and wrist restraints, floggers, double-sided dildos, ball gags, penal gauges, spacer bars, a gas mask hood with a lock on the back, nipple clamps, chrome-plated O-rings, and an Aerostech ET302R electro ejaculator.
I mean, is that all? I mean, that just sounds like my carry-on on any given vacation. But the one thing I took away from all that is what the hell is an electro ejaculator?
Well, okay, I have to send you pictures of it in order to like really get you like a full picture on what the heck is going on. So again, go look those up. But hold on, let me just get this to you really fast.
Because, you know, I mean, like, I felt like I was well versed in a lot of the like sections, like not that I'm saying I don't use them, but I know what they are. Most of them are self-explanatory, but an electro ejaculator just sounds not pleasant at all.
No, it really doesn't. And again, like, definitely, it sounds like you like know a whole lot more about this than I do, but I definitely this is not my world at all. Just to be clear, and like I feel really like even weird talking about this because I know my mom like listens to this podcast regularly. So I'm just gonna end this. I'm just gonna
end it right
there.
there.
Yeah, I can't go any further without feeling real weird at Thanksgiving. So I just texted a picture of it to you. This is what it looks like in a very how do I put this, like, calm sense, I suppose.
I was about to say, it looks like either like an old 80s radio, old 80s ham radio, or like something truckers would use to communicate with each other.
Yeah.
But it does not look something I would want anywhere near my private parts.
Yeah, well, so this is like just the base of it. Like, there are lots of attachments to be used alongside this thing. But so just for our listeners, right? So we're talking about this little like box. Like, evidently this is where the electro part comes from. And then you're also looking at a remote. So this is controlled outside of this machine. Let me just tell you about this machine like a little bit more. So the Aerostech ET302R electro ejaculator is a machine that uses a series of electric pulses to cause a person to ejaculate while they're under anesthetic or is otherwise incapacitated. They are, so like unconscious here. They are most common in dom-sub relationships, so that's dominant versus submissive relationships, due to the ability of the toy to force a partner to ejaculate on their terms, and also the painful nature of this toy.
So, I mean, like, all joking aside and stuff like that, I mean, it's like, if it makes you feel good and stuff like that, have at it. But at the same time, the use of the word anesthetic or unconscious just does, like, it makes me feel weird. Like, I got a little bit of chills.
Sure. And like also like again, like think about what you may, like everyone listening, like how this relates to Robert, right? But like, like thinking about like that is how it's like talked about in like reviews and like in like like I found this all online kind of thing. And so like it's not just like this is not like how it relates directly to this case at all. Like this is just what it's known to do. So important context there, big time, I think. And
of course, I'm assuming that Joseph, Victor, Dylan, or all three of them were very familiar with this toy?
Well, kinda, Jordy. It turns out that only Joseph and Dylan were known to use this toy together. Remember when I told you that this three-way relationship was really more like two-way relationships?
Right, yeah.
Well, here's how that worked. Joseph and Victor were more of a traditional romantic couple, right? They shared a bedroom together, the very traditional kind of thing. And based on what they were able to learn about their relationship, Joseph was more dominant with Victor. But based on Joseph's search history and computer data, they learned that that could not have been more opposite for Joseph and Dylan's relationship. You see, on Joseph and Dylan's computer was a whole range of pornographic material, really kinky stuff here. And police also discovered that Joseph was a member of a BDSM chat room, and police hypothesized that this may have been actually where Joseph met Dylan. Based on the pictures and videos on their computers, police realized that in Joseph and Dylan's relationship, Joseph was definitely not the dominant one. He was 100% the submissive one in this relationship, and Dylan was definitely more of the dominant type. And I'll just let all of your imaginations go to clue you in on what those pictures and videos showed to give police that idea.
I mean, that's good for them. I mean, dom, sub, kinky relationship, that's perfect. I love that for you. But again, it's like, what does all this have to do with Robert, a straight man?
True. And but potentially though, Jody, a lot actually, but we will come back to that in a little bit. But in all of this, we're missing a pretty significant piece of evidence in this case, right? And that piece of evidence is Robert's autopsy. But the results from that are back. The autopsy reports that Robert had indeed died from 3 surgical-like stab wounds to his chest, about 4.5 inches deep. The examiner writes that they were so perfectly inflicted that she believes no one was moving rapidly during the attack, neither the attacker nor Robert, but there were no ligature marks anywhere around his body or defensive wounds, leading the medical examiner to conclude that Robert was unconscious during this entire attack and and not held down in any way. But other evidence leads the examiner to say that he was still alive while being stabbed. And what points them into that direction is the blood found in his intestines. That leads the examiner to believe that his digestive system was still operating at the time of death, and ergo Robert was still alive.
See, that's the other thing too, is like you have this toy that like you're supposed to use when someone's unconscious, like the slow stab wounds and stuff like that. And so it's literally like all the pieces of a puzzle are there, like to fit around, but it's like there's one piece, like the main piece of the puzzle that's missing that investigators don't have. And so it's like you can't complete the puzzle, so to speak. And so it's just, again, another really frustrating part of this case.
Well, yeah, and that you described that really, really well. I never really like thought about it that way, but like you're totally right. Like it does feel like there's like this one big thing that's going to like complete this whole thing that's just like not there, and they don't even. I kind of got the vibe that they don't even know what that puzzle piece is right at this point.
They just know there's one big piece they're missing, and if they get like either it's a piece of evidence, someone confesses or something like that, but like once they get that one big piece, it literally all just clicks together.
Yeah, and to me, right, like when I heard like lack of blood, right, like to me that says, okay, well, he must have died in some other way than these stab wounds, and these stab wounds were inflicted afterwards, right? But like this is like clear evidence, like, you know, based on like scientific, you know, data that suggested here that no, like he was actually still very much so alive in this whole thing, and like, and again, not for much longer, but like as all this was happening, like he was still breathing, he was like his blood was still pumping. Like all of this, like everything was still working as it should have. So like again, conclude what you may from that. I have my own conclusions, and we will talk about all that. Well, so there were also signs of asphyxiation, however, which could mean any kind of deprivation of oxygen. Normally, that would look like strangulation, but again, there is no wound of any kind on Robert's body that would point to that in any sort of way.
And again, it's just like what we said like a minute ago. It's another one of those pieces of the puzzle. Looks like he was asphyxiated somehow. Like, was he strangled? Was it chokehold? Was it ligature strangle? Something like that. We just don't know. And it's just another frustrating puzzle piece thrown onto the pile.
Well, even more frustrating here, Jordy, is Robert's toxicology report, and that is even more interesting. Not because of what it shows necessarily, but because of what it doesn't show. Robert's toxicology report shows that Robert didn't have any kind of drugs or toxins in his system at all. And that's really interesting because there are some other marks that set investigators and examiners off from the very beginning. And those marks were 8 needlepoint marks that were found on his neck, chest, and foot and hand. And when these were noticed, police asked paramedics if it was possible that they were from like a possible IV line, right? From when, you know, when Robert was put into an ambulance. And they don't rule that out as being the cause of the needle marks on his hand, sure. But the other markings, paramedics said, were not places any paramedic or any nurse or any doctor, for that matter, would use for an IV line, leading them to say conclusively 100% that the needle marks must have been made on Robert's body before paramedics ever arrived.
And again, it's like I used to work in an OR, so I used to actually help put IVs and stuff in people. And most of these sound absurd. Like the ones on your hand, of course, that's a commonplace. But most of these other places there's no way an IV line is going in there. A foot, or, you know, even if it's like a difficult IV you're trying to get, you're not going anywhere near the feet or in the neck or anything like that for an IV. And so it's just another weird little puzzle piece.
Very weird. Well, Robert was not a known drug user, so the idea that these were possible needle marks that were inflicted for recreational use, for lack of better words, didn't make a whole lot of sense to police. And plus, even if he was a drug user, you know, without anyone knowing about it, they would have expected to find some sort of drug in Robert's system, right?
Exactly. And so if he's not a known drug user and it wasn't the IV or anything like that, and he has all these marks, like I have an idea of what I think happened, and it's like horrific to think about, but like, where did the marks actually come from? is, or where do the police think the marks come from?
Well, this leads to a wild theory, Jordy, that I had personally never heard of before I ended up reading this case. Police theorize that Robert may have been injected with a paralytic. Now, this would explain the puncture wounds and why Robert didn't have any defensive wounds. Of course, Robert didn't have any defensive wounds because he couldn't defend himself physically, hypothetically speaking, right? But that leads police to a really specific kind of drug called succinylcholine. It's a paralytic drug that breaks down into the body so quickly that it is undetectable after just spending a few minutes in the body, but it leaves patients completely immobile.
So I'm actually familiar with this drug. This drug, we call it Sucks in the OR, because I used to be an anesthesia technician. And so I worked with the anesthesiologists and the CRNAs and stuff like that. And Sucks is a drug that you would use to put patients under and paralyze their body before surgery. And so it is scary. It's like you cannot move at all. And so the fact that, like, I would love to know where that drug came from, because that's a very, like, controlled drug that, like, you'd only get in, like, a medical, like, style situation. And so it's really mind-boggling how anyone would get their hands on that outside of being in the medical profession.
Yeah. So, really good point, because it is, like, very common in the medical world, right? From what I've learned, you know way more about this than I do, I'm sure. But, like, so my, immediate instinct goes to, okay, well, like, whoever did this must have had that sort of connection somehow. Must have been a nurse, must have been a doctor, paramedic, and stolen it, right? Like, that's the only thing that makes any sort of sense. But, like, again, if we're going down this rabbit hole, but if you could explain, actually, because I think your insight here is going to be really important. I guess how does that work, right? Like, do you understand? I guess the scientific part of, because if you inject yourself with pretty much any other drug, I would imagine, anyways, right? It would come up in the tox report. So how does it just break down? Like, how is it completely undetectable?
I don't know, like, the full, like, medical terms or whatever, but it, like, the way it attaches to, like, your blood and your system and stuff like that, like, it's one of those drugs that we have to constantly keep pushing in every I'm not sure the exact time frame, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's like every hour or so. And so it's one of those drugs that we have to keep injecting into the lines and stuff like that. And you kind of really got to monitor to make sure like you're staying on top of it and monitoring their vitals and stuff like that. And so it's one of those drugs that's really weird that someone that's not a medical professional would have their hands on, because it's not really used outside of putting people to sleep for a major surgery, because it's one of those things that has to be monitored in a medical situation. So it's just really weird that it would even be in any sort of case outside of an OR, an operating room.
So I guess if I'm understanding it correctly, it simply just works so fast that it's gone.
Oh,
like
it works
minutes?
super fast. Like, it will go through your system really. Like, it usually takes, oh my goodness, less than a minute to take effect if they're like pushing it through an IV line or something, or if it is being injected directly. So.
And so my understanding too with like medical examiners, again, just through my research, is that like medical examiners like typically don't even test for it because it breaks down so fast. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and so like I said, it's another one of those things. It's not like a normal drug people would have access to, so I'm sure they wouldn't normally test it, because not only does it again breaks down so fast, but again, just sound like a broken record, but the fact that like no one's going to assume that any normal civilian has access to this drug, so there's really no point to test it. Yeah. So the fact that it is present and like maybe it didn't come up because they didn't test it, like I can understand why, because it's just a drug that like there are other street type drugs, I'm sure, I'm not an expert in that, but I'm sure there are other drugs you can get on the street that have the same effect or something like that. But the fact that this one specific drug that's very commonly used in anesthetics for surgeries, I can see why they wouldn't test for that to begin with.
Interesting. From what I read too, like none of the three of these guys are affiliated with the medical world at all. And so like that, it is kind of left field-ish for me.
Yeah.
Like if if we're to assume that, some sort of guilt from them, like, where did this come from?
And it's not like even something like you can't just like any job at a hospital you can have access to. Like these things are kept in machines that like you need your fingerprint, your ID badge, and all this stuff. Yeah, and so like the only people that can get it is a doctor, a CRNA, or a nurse.
Wow. But again, like all of this is like super crazy, right? But none of this points a direct finger at anyone being Robert's killer, let alone those killers being Joseph, Victor, and Dylan. But the investigators do have something that could help. It's DNA evidence that was analyzed through the medical examiner's office. That DNA is seminal DNA, and it was found inside of Robert's anal cavity. It's a massive aha moment, right? Like whoever's semen is inside of Robert must have been the one to sneak into Robert's bedroom at night, paralyze him, use this, fetishized machine on him in some sick sex game, and then stab him 3 times to his chest and then wash him off before placing him right back onto his bed. But when those tests come back, they are absolutely baffled by their results because the semen that was inside of Robert's anal cavity belongs to Robert himself.
So that is just one of those details that it's too wild to be true. That's almost like a twist in like some cheesy detective story. Because it's like you have the smoking gun where it's like, oh, we have, DNA semen found in the victim's body in their anus, and so of course that's going to be like the smoking gun because it's like this is going to lead us to our killer. And then when it like is revealed to be the victim himself, that's just one of those too crazy to believe. And so it's like the end of a bad like CSI episode or something like that. Like, I can't even wrap my head around it.
Yeah, or the end of a really bad like podcast, like haha, like we're toward the end of this podcast, but like so because like that's just where we are. But like no, but like seriously though, it's like it's so unbelievable that it's like WTF? It's like what, like where the heck do we even go from there, right?
How do you come back from that?
Right, but like that combined with this like weird sex electro ejaculator machine, right? Like that, like to me is like, okay, he was unconscious. This machine works best when like somebody's unconscious, like cool. And then on top of that, like he like there's like his own semen like all over himself. Like, because like when you find semen, right, like inside of a victim, inside of someone's dead, like you obviously like immediate assumption is like, okay, sexual assault, like murder, like that's how this whole thing happened. But like when it's his own, like how the fuck does that even happen?
And how do you explain that?
How do you explain that? Yeah, and it's not like he's like this like big like sex deviant at all. Like he's like very much so a house husband, and so like where like. What the fuck? Like, what the fuck? Like, that's the only thing I have to say is, like, what the fuck? Because, like, how, like, what was the series of events that, like, led to somebody, like
in the span of an hour and a half.
In the span of an hour and a half.
How do things escalate so quickly?
Seriously.
From the time he gets there, after just setting this meeting up, like this, like overnight sleepover,
right?
It is supposed to be his very best friend's house, and then within an hour, it leads to all this, and now his own semen's inside of his anus and stuff like that. Like it, again, make it make sense because none of it makes sense.
None of it makes sense. Well, and let's try to make it make sense, right? Because if we're to believe this story that people are trying to make us believe, right? It's this guy. Within an hour and a half, all within an hour and a half ish, right? Like this, somebody, like everyone goes to bed, somebody breaks into the house, walks upstairs past somebody who lives in the home, right past their bedroom, walks in, injects them with this paralytic, sexually assaults them, with this machine or in some other way, so that way they, ejaculate all over themselves, and then inserts that semen into their anal cavity, stabs them to death, cleans up their body, walks back through this entire house, down the stairs, out this, back door without disturbing the dust and the cobwebs and all that jazz. And all, again, within an hour and a half, and without these other 3 guys that are in the house hearing a thing beyond a scream.
Yeah, and so again, that's too many coincidences to line up like that. Like it's just not believable. But I think that's the frustrating thing about this
absurd
case is the fact that you have all these absurd, bizarre, like out of left field details and stuff like that, and it's like none of them fit together enough to be like, okay, this is conclusively what happened. This is who did it. This is like the series of events, because even like the timeline is kind of like all over the place.
Right. Fair.
Because it's like,
yeah.
Like he, like the paralytic, he's like, these toys were used on him, then he was stabbed, and then his body was washed, and then all this, like, how did all this happen in such a short amount of time?
Right.
And it's just bewildering, I guess is the word I'm looking for, to try to wrap your head around all this.
Very good word to describe this.
Thank you.
And, and I think, and I have so many thoughts about, like, how all of this ended up happening and, like, the end result of all this crap, and it's obviously, like, beyond insane. Beyond insane. And it's, not over yet either, though, Jordy, as I'm sure I know that's true. But, to get to the rest of this story, and to see how this all ends up playing out, you'll just have to wait for part 2, which will drop on Beers with Queers this coming Monday.
A two-parter. So yeah, if you want to know like how this absolutely bizarre and the most bizarre case you'll ever hear about ends, you get to spend some more time with us.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, and again, like I teased you guys at the top of this case. I hope that you guys, like saw how I was teeing this whole thing up, and believe me, by now, there is so much that we have not even touched on, not even gotten to yet, because we had to talk about all of this just in one part, right? And so just think about what's in part 2. But, tell everyone how that all happens and how they can listen to all your other cases. Tell everyone where they can find you guys online.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find us where, of course, Beers with Queers, a true crime podcast. You can find us on iTunes or Spotify. Social media links, we have Instagram at Beers with Queers Pod, that's POD, or on Facebook at Beers with Queers, a true crime podcast. And, we post our episodes every Monday, right at midnight. We try to stay on top of that. And then we have a back catalog of 42 or so episodes. And so I'm excited to do this case, because this is definitely one that's stays in the back of my mind constantly, because I'm always like, I'll be doing something. Time. And then I'll be like, whatever. I wonder if there's any updates to that case and stuff like that. So I'm excited to tell you guys how this all ends.
Well, we will give you all of the updated stuff, like, on this part 2 for sure, like literally up to the where we are right at this very second. And I have not seen a thing about what you guys are coming up with on this part 2, and so I'm so excited to see what you guys are coming up with. Excited to go into this totally blind. I know, like, the general story, but I'm excited to see where you guys go with this for sure. But in the meantime, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you all so much for listening. We are going to put all of our sources on our website so you can read everything for yourself and probably come up with a few theories too. And if you are just loving this podcast and are just wondering how you can tell everyone and anyone about it, the best way to help others discover this podcast is by leaving us a 5-star rating and a review wherever you are listening right now. So make sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you're wondering what we have in store for you next week, here's a quick sneak peek. Hello, everybody. It's Liam.
And I'm Cornelia Nicholson. Next week, I'm stepping into the crime vineyard, and we're talking about a bizarre, mysterious death that took place on a snowy Midwestern December morning.
It's an unsolved case from almost 100 years ago, and it's almost too strange to believe. But it's all true, and we'll tell you all about it next Wine Wednesday on another episode of Crime Over Wine.
Proud member of the Podnuga Network.